Hello, happy Thursday. Back for some more Tale of Despereaux by Kate DiCamillo. When we left off, Despereaux had gone back to see the threadmaster to get some thread because he planned to tether himself to it so that he would not get lost in the dungeon as he goes to rescue the princess. And the threadmaster gives him a needle, which he thinks is a sword. All right, this one's called What Cook Was Stirring, so let's get going. That night, Despereaux rolled the thread from the threadmaster's lair along innumerable hallways and down 3 flights of stairs. Reader, allow me to put this in perspective for you. Your average house mouse, or castle mouse if you will, weighs somewhere in the neighborhood of 4 ounces. Despereaux, as you well know, was in no way average. In fact, he was so incredibly small that he weighed about half of what the average mouse weighs. 2 ounces. That is all. Think about it. He was nothing but 2 ounces of mouse pushing a spool of thread that weighed almost as much as he did. Honestly, reader, what do you think the chances are of such a small mouse succeeding in his quest? Zip. 0. Nada. Goose eggs. But you must, when you are calculating the odds of the mouse's success, factor in his love for the princess. Love, as we have already discussed, is a powerful, wonderful, ridiculous thing capable of moving mountains and spools of thread. Even with the love and purpose in his heart, Despereaux was very, very tired when he reached the door to the castle kitchen at midnight. His paws were shaking, and his muscles were jumping, and the place where his tail should be was throbbing. Remember what happened to his tail? And he still had a very, very long way to go, into the kitchen and down the many stairs of the dungeon, and then through, somehow, someway, through the rat-filled darkness of the dungeon itself, not knowing where he was going. And oh, reader, when he stopped to consider what lay ahead of him, Despereaux was filled with an icky feeling of despair. It must feel like a daunting task for him. He leaned his head against the spool of thread, and he smelled celery there, and he thought of Hovis, and how Hovis seemed to believe in him and his quest. So the mouse raised his head and squared his shoulders and pushed the spool of thread forward again into the kitchen, where he saw, too late, that there was a light burning. Despereaux froze. Cook was in the kitchen. She was bent over the stove. She was stirring something. Was it a sauce? No. Was it a stew? No. What Cook was stirring was soup. Soup, reader. In the king's own castle, against the king's law, right under the king's very nose, Cook was making soup. As the mouse looked on, Cook put her face into the steam rising from the pot and took a deep breath. She smiled a beatific smile, and the steam rose around her and caught the light of the candle and made a halo over her head. Despereaux knew how Cook felt about mice in her kitchen. He remembered quite clearly her instructions to Mig regarding himself. Kill him. The only good mouse is a dead mouse. But he had to go through Cook's kitchen to get to the dungeon door, and he had no time to waste. Soon daylight would dawn and the whole castle would be awake, and a mouse would have no chance at all of pushing a spool of thread across the floor without attracting a great deal of attention. He would have to sneak past the mouse-hating Cook now. And so, screwing his courage to the sticking place, Despereaux leaned against the spool of thread and set it rolling across the floor. Cook turned from the stove, a dripping spoon in her hand and a frightened look on her face, and shouted, "Who's there?" Ooh, she probably thinks she's going to get in trouble. Chapter 44, Whose Ears Are Those? "Who's there?" shouted Cook again. Despereaux wisely said nothing. The kitchen was silent. Said Cook. "Nothing. It's nothing at all. Just my nervous Nellie ears playing tricks on me. You're an old fool," she said to herself as she turned back to the stove. "You're just an old fool afraid of being caught making soup." Despereaux slumped against the spool of thread, and as he leaned there, his heart pounding, his paws shaking, a small, wonderful something occurred. A midnight breeze entered the kitchen and danced over to the stove and picked up the scent of the soup, and then swirled across the floor and delivered the smell right directly into the mouse's nose. Despereaux put his head up in the air. He sniffed. He sniffed some more. He had never in his life smelled anything so lovely, so inspiring. With each sniff he took, he felt himself growing stronger, braver. Cook leaned in close to the kettle and put the spoon in and took the spoon out and blew upon the spoon and then brought it to her lips and sipped and swallowed. She said. She took another sip. Missing something, she said. More salt, maybe. She put the spoon down and took up an enormous salt shaker and sprinkled salt into the kettle. And Despereaux, feeling emboldened by the smell of the soup, again set to work pushing the spool of thread. Quickly, he said to himself, rolling the spool across the floor. Do it quickly. Do not think. Just push. Cook whirled the salt shaker in her hand and shouted, Who goes there? Despereaux stopped pushing. He hid behind the spool of thread as Cook took the candle from the stove and held it up high. Humph, she said. The candlelight came closer, closer. What's this? The light came to rest directly on Despereaux's big ears, sticking up from behind the spool of thread. Ho, said the cook. Whose ears are those? And the light from the candle then shone full in Despereaux's face. A mouse, said Cook. A mouse in my kitchen. Despereaux closed his eyes. He prepared for his death. He waited, reader, and waited. And then he heard the sound of laughter. He opened his eyes and looked at Cook. Ha, said Cook. Ha, ha. For the first time in my life, I'm glad to see a mouse in my kitchen. Why? She asked. Why am I glad? Oh, because a mouse is not a king's man here to punish me for making soup, that's why. Because a mouse is not a king's man here to take me to the dungeon for owning a spoon. Ho, he, a mouse. I, Cook, am glad to see a mouse. Cook's face was red and her stomach was shaking. Ho, he, she said again, and not just any mouse. A mouse with a needle tied around his waist. A mouse with no tail. Ain't it lovely? Ho, he. She shook her head and wiped at her eyes. Look, Mouse, these are extraordinary times, and because of that, we must have some peace between us. I will not ask what you are doing in my kitchen, and you, in return, will tell no one what I am cooking. She turned then and went back to the stove and set down the candle and picked up the spoon and put it in the pot of soup and took it back out and tasted the soup, smacking her lips together. Not right, she said, not quite right, missing something still. Despereaux did not move. He could not move. He was paralyzed by fear. He sat on the kitchen floor. One small tear fell out of his left eye. He had expected Cook to kill him. Instead, reader, she had laughed at him, and he was surprised how much her laughter hurt. And that's where we'll stop for today. We have about 4 chapters left. I'd love to finish these soon. I hope you're hanging in there with me. I'll see you guys soon.